Welcome, I'm Ann Trujillo. You might be hearing people say how they have been treated differently based on how they look or their background. Differences aren't bad, rather they should be celebrated. We know that some of the things happening right now might be causing you stress or anxiety, and that's normal. Understanding, discussing, and appreciating our differences is the only way to help us all grow towards a better future. We've gathered some experts here today to answer your questions about differences. And joining us for this conversation are Lindsay Standish, the Chief Outdoor Program Officer for Girl Scouts Colorado, pediatrician Dr. Brandy Freeman from Children's Hospital Colorado, also from the hospital, Robert Franklin, the Program Manager for Diversity, Health Equity, and Inclusion, Rob Nesby, a preschool teacher at Early Learning Center in Aspen and a Colorado Mountain College student. So thank you all for being here, and thanks for offering your input today. How exactly do we start this conversation? I think we're speaking to parents first, and then we're going to bring in conversation for kids as well. So where do you start this conversation if you're a parent? Brandy, I'll start with you.
Sure. Great. Thank you for that question. I think first is thinking about your child's age. Each child's going to understand something at a different level related to their development. And so using that as a guide, also using the questions your child asks you to guide what you're going to tell them, whether they're asking about current events, they're asking why was someone not nice to someone else at the grocery store, whatever it may be, to use those as your guides in starting the conversation.
I think a lot of people talk about how it's important to confront their own biases when talking to their children. Some parents might think that that's showing weakness. What do you think? Robert?
Yeah, I was going to raise my hand just to make sure I got an opportunity to say every brain is biased, right? And at different ages, we can understand that. Even as adults, we don't understand that over the decades we've been alive, our brains have been told to think a certain way and to respond a certain way, and it's connected to our evolution. So if we have a neurotypical brain, it's going to be biased, and that's a good thing. And at the same time, some of those biases impact our relationships and impact how we work and where we work and how we vote. And so checking in on those biases is tough, but there are a lot of tools out there that you can use to try to check into them and then talk about them, and that's how you mitigate them. So it's not a sign of weakness, it's actually a sign of health that your brain is working the way it's supposed to, and we can see about how that programming might be impacting the way that we work in this world and the way that others work.
You talked about tools. Like what kind of tools? What do you mean by that?
One of my favorites is the Harvard Implicit Association Test, or Project Implicit. It's a free tool online that you could Google, and I think there are like 13 different tests that you can take on what your preferences or your automatic associations are based on this tool that the authors put together. So it's very scientific. It's millions and millions of people have done it over the world, and it continues to tell us how, as a group here in the United States or here and even in Colorado, how we might be thinking about our world along the lines of race, gender, ability, those kinds of identities. And then there are other tools that cost a little bit more money, but I start with the Harvard Implicit Association Test.
So Rob and Lindsay, I know you both work directly with kids. Do they see color? Do they see differences early on?
I'll be honest about that. I actually had the same kids for 3 years. I got to move up with them several times. And it wasn't until they got older that they actually started pointing things out. Like at one point, one was coloring a crayon. It's like, this crayon's the same color as your skin. And I was like, yes, it actually is. And then we had a section where we were just discussing differences. So we were just looking at each other. And one of the parents had gone home and asked her child what was different about everybody in class. And when it got to me, he paused for a second and just said, his head's shiny. We didn't see color at all.
How old?
My group
what age group?
They're getting ready to go to kindergarten.
And Lindsay?
Yeah, I think even to build on what Robert was saying earlier, that bias starts to occur at a really young age, and that's just how people categorize things. It's something that they're able to see. How are things different? How are things the same? Just as Rob was saying, that the kids in his class were able to see how things were different, how things were the same, and even very young children categorize that way. And so that's why it is important at a very young age to start having these conversations that people may think, well, they're too young. They won't know that there's any difference. But it's critical to start it at a very young age. And be aware of your own bias, but also know that how you're educating your children at that young age will make a difference in how they have bias as they move forward in life.
So what do those, go ahead, Robert, and then we'll talk about what those conversations look like.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to give you a segue there from what Lindsay was saying, is that oftentimes we as parents, as adults, we're shying away from talking about these differences, even though, as we hear, our teachers are talking about them and acknowledging them and giving our kids the language to be talking about differences. So we can't stifle that at home, even though there might be some guilt about that or some fear about that. Actually, the way forward. And so I applaud Rob and others who are having these conversations even in preschool before kindergarten, because those are examples for what we want to do at home.
Okay, so give us some examples, any of you, of how we have these conversations with our kids. And let's start, Rob, maybe with your age group. I mean, you did mention crayons, but at that preschool age, what should we be saying to our kids?
Well, like I said, I generally just, we had a circle time where we're just pointing out differences, but then also to explain that we are very similar. Like, just because we look different on the outside doesn't mean that it's okay to treat someone differently. And
So
my kids are
very matter of fact,
just staying very inclusive. I mean, they're not, they all play together. I have kids who speak several different languages, but, speak English at school, and just making them feel comfortable and making them feel loved more than anything else.
Dr. Freeman?
So I agree. I think about, so Rob, the kids this year you just graduated, that's actually my favorite age group because they are so honest.
Yes.
And they don't shy away from anything. And so when I think about kids and kind of speaking to their level about, what is different, I want them to tell me, what are they seeing that's different? I love asking kids how old they think I am, and I usually get anywhere from 10 to 105. But I think just really thinking about what they're asking and then answering in a way that is on their level, that speaks to what they're talking about and what they want to, or appropriate for them to hear.
So if I'm talking to a group of kids, I would share with them that a long time ago, a teacher named Jane Elliott told her kids that only the ones with blue eyes could play outside and have extra recess time, and all the kids with brown eyes had to stay inside and do extra homework. And I would ask, do you think that would be fair? What if that happened in your classroom? All the kids that speak one language have to stay inside, and the kids that speak the other language can go outside and do extra things. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's right? How would you feel about that? Those are things that I would ask, and we have examples of that. You can show them the video.
That's a great example. Lindsay, any other examples that you have? Because I think parents are looking for tools in this conversation, what they can do at home specifically to help ease that conversation.
I think it's just not shying away from if your child does make a comment that something is different, whether that be someone's language or their skin color or their hair, being able to acknowledge that and validate that it is different, but also following that up to make sure that that's what makes people special and unique, and to that different doesn't mean bad. And I think that's really important to be able to follow it up of how special that makes everyone. And also say, well, we're different in these ways, but be able to look at in what ways might we be the same, that maybe you have a friend in school that perhaps looks different than you or may speak a different language, but do they like science and you like science? Do they love your family and you love your family? And finding those commonalities of we're all human and really connected in that way.
And what about for kids who come home and say, Mom or Dad, some child said something mean about me at school today. How do you deal with those confrontations? And particularly if as regards to race, if that was the incident.
That to me would most likely be probably a parent-teacher conference, and you'd have to discuss it. But also letting the child know that it's okay to go home and talk about things. Because I had some kids who, not necessarily racism, but were like, I don't want to go home and talk to my parents about this. And with my kids, it actually took me a long time to even bring up racism, just because I felt I didn't have the place. I felt it was more of a parent conversation, or if the parent came to me and asked me, then I would. But now, especially the fact that I'm the only male teacher and I'm the only Black male teacher, I decided that I really needed to start speaking out more. And so I do talk to the kids a lot more. And it's basically just keeping an open conversation and not shutting it down.
And have you had any pushback from any of the parents or the other teachers?
None. So still working on it, but yeah, it's a good,
Well,
good thing to be
we're
doing.
all still working on it, right? We all are. Okay, so through the Value of Girl Scouts, we have some questions that were submitted by young people for young people. So I just jump in to this answer if you have it. So our first question came from 9-year-old Tegan in Colorado Springs, who wants to know, in what ways can we as kids talk to our schools and teachers about making diversity and inclusion a focus of our educational curriculum? Because I suspect that's not part of the curriculum right now for a lot of districts. I don't know that, but what do you think?
What was the student's name?
Tegan.
Tegan, I think that's an awesome question. And I think you can look to your partners in Denver. We have a Denver board member whose name is Tay Anderson, who is pushing the Denver school system to think more critically about what they have in their curriculum, not just in the high schools, but K through 12, K through 20. So I think you have a voice. You have a school board down there in Colorado Springs that you can go and speak to. You can put your name on the list to talk about the things that you want to see in your classroom. And they listen because they work for you. It doesn't feel like it because there's a lot of grown-ups in that space. But what they want to hear from is you and your classmates, and maybe you can get a whole group of you yourselves together to talk about, you want to hear about different histories. You want to hear about how inclusion works. You want to see diversity in the books that you're reading and the text that you have. So I would say, use your voice. Go down to wherever the school board meets and have them hear you.
Any other suggestions?
Well, this is what we use at our school. It's called ECHRS, which is the Early Childhood Rating System. And they actually have a section specifically on promoting diversity. And so, like we make sure we have, X amount of dolls are different colors, the books, we make sure that they're inclusive of everyone. The dress up area that we had all kinds of different costumes from different cultures. And yeah, we talk about it.
Yeah, and I would just say, Tegan, wow, applause for being a change maker in your school. That's the first step. You see a problem, you figure out how to address it, and just asking that question is a great first step. And you really inspired us at Girl Scouts that we have a list of resources for parents and for caregivers, and we certainly want to add some for educators too, that there's some great resources out there for educators. Black Lives Matter at School is a great resource of being able to pull together different resources to see and to share. And we want to be able to pull some of those resources that then, you can even say, as Robert was saying, as you go to your teacher or your school board or somebody and say, hey, here's a list of some things maybe you could look into as well, and we can take some of that work out of it for you and provide some resources. But right on, Tegan, that's awesome. You're moving in that direction.
It's a great question. So to the issue of Black Lives Matter, and specifically George Floyd and his heinous death, how do you make that age appropriate? How do you have that discussion with your children? Let's say, what you discuss with a 6-year-old is not what you would discuss with a 16-year-old. So let's talk to teenagers right now, for example. What would you say about what is happening in our country right now? How do you describe that and help them think that through?
Are you referring to Black Lives Matter? Or...
I think both. I think Black Lives Matter and the protests and as it pertains to George Floyd's death. Yes.
Well, I think a lot of confusion with the Black Lives Matter is that people assume that we're not thinking of everyone, but what we're really trying to do is point out what is actually happening to our community specifically, especially with the amount of police brutality. So I don't want, what we don't want is for them to think that we don't care. It's just we're trying to draw as much attention to this issue as possible and make it more public.
So to follow up with that, then what do you say to kids who come back with, well, don't all lives matter? Because we've all heard that conversation. So what would you say to help kids?
Anybody who has double digits in their age right now, you have probably an opportunity to check out your library or Google the Black Lives Matter movement to see about what it is they're talking about. And what you'll see there is that what they're saying is that all lives do matter. And because Black Lives Matter, we need to focus right now on what that means. So you can Google it. You can look up the Black Lives Matter movement or any of the social media posts that are out there and find that the demands in the movement are about lifting up an experience for everyone. That if, as Rob was talking about, if police brutality becomes less of an issue for the Black community, then it's less of an issue for all communities. And so what we're looking for is a safer way to live for a particular people that will lift everyone up. At the same time, to the other question about George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, you can look up social or current events. I remember being 16 and having to do current events. Check them out and see what is our media talking about and where are the facts. And if you, as you did, you're going to see how our system is broken, and we're trying to lift the idea that we can do better in every part of our community.
I would offer specifically for teenagers, I think what also can be helpful as you're processing things, to process with different people, process with your family definitely, but process with your friends of different backgrounds, and getting those different perspectives is really going to help you grow in your understanding and your perception of what is happening in our country right now.
So would you suggest that parents, maybe especially in these times, weekly sit down with their kids and let's just talk about current affairs, current events, issues that might be, because everybody's on social media these days, so I'm sure kids are seeing everything, particularly 16-year-olds. Is that a valuable tool to give to parents or to suggest?
I think that's a fantastic tool. As a pediatrician, we are all about decreasing screen time. And that has been really hard in this pandemic. And so any way you can do it, conversations about current events, thinking about how they're processing things, I think it's a really valuable use of time right now. And of course, get you off a screen.
Okay, so this same conversation then with a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old, how does that conversation work?
I'd ask a lot of questions of my 6-year-old, 9-year-old. I think Dr. Freeman has said it and Lindsay said it, and I think probably Rob would agree that we want to find out where the kids are coming from, what they know, and what they don't. So if I want to talk about police brutality, for example, because that's on the news and that's what kids are hearing about, I would ask, well, what do you think the role of the police are? Right? And I'm sure we're going to get, they need to protect and serve. They need to take care of people. They need to help people when they're sick or when they're in danger. And so we would talk about, all right, well, if what we're seeing is not that, then what should we do about it? How do you feel knowing that sometimes the police are a part of a situation where a person dies, and that even on video, we see that might not be necessary? How do you feel about that? What should we do about that? And then we know what we're talking about, and we don't have to encourage or implant any words or ideas because we're working at their developmental level.
Do you let them see the video?
Depending on the age, I don't know how you can avoid it, right? And all respect due to screen time not being as big a thing, Dr. Freeman. It's on our TV here. It's if you're watching you're watching We Bare Bears on YouTube, and an ad comes in, and it's sometimes hard to avoid that kind of stuff. So I don't know how to avoid that at certain ages when they have access.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
And I think just to follow up on what Robert's saying there, that making sure you're processing those emotions after, whether it's seeing a video or having a conversation where you're talking about things of, not assuming what that emotion is for the child, but really figuring out, are they angry? Are they sad? Are they confused? Are they all of it? I mean, we've worked all of those things about this, and just helping to process that and then figure out, how do you take that emotion and put it into action? I think kids are going to feel really out of control with a lot of this. They're seeing these things happen that make them angry, make them sad. And they feel out of control, but how can you then channel that into something that may be in their control? And some of these questions that the kids are asking, I think we're seeing a lot of that, of these kids trying to figure out, well, now what can I do? I feel this way. What can I do with that? How can I actually make a change to improve things?
Well, there is a 14-year-old girl named Taylor in Grand Junction who wants to know, what should we do if we see racism occurring in school? How do we spot or know racism? That's 14-year-old Taylor. Dr. Freeman?
Yeah, so my first response to this, so I think it's kind of a two-part question. So if you see racism in school, Taylor, I want to speak up. If it doesn't feel right, whether it's going to a teacher, to an administrator, if it's one of your friends, to say something. I think the harder question is, how do you know if something is racism? I think you, in some ways, can use the same philosophy in that if it doesn't feel right, if something just, it's kind of, I call it spidey sense, we use it in medicine a lot, but if something just doesn't feel right, to say something, to ask a question about it. Sometimes just starting a conversation about something can produce change and stop something from happening.
I think
How do you find?
Oh, at 14, I think we need to talk about what do you think racism is, Taylor? So if you think you're seeing something and your spidey sense is tingling, do you feel like it's because of a person's skin color, or are you noticing that something is happening to only a certain group of people who identify a certain way? And that's how you're starting to classify or characterize racist acts or racist events. Then that's how you know. It also begins, I think, with a definition, and it might be time to ask our teachers, what does it mean if they haven't already?
Now, it occurs to me that we're all assuming that our teachers have had these conversations and are all knowing and all caring. How do you find the right adult to go to with these questions when you've seen an incident that makes you feel uncomfortable? Lindsay, what do you think?
I think that especially right now when we may be in school in person, or it could be a little more challenging if you're not in school all of the time. I think we need to think about that as well too, if we're doing more remote learning, that I think there are adults in children's lives that kids you can trust and you can go to, whether that's a parent, whether that's a teacher, whether that's someone that in any other way. And talk to them about it. I think really identifying an adult that you know and you trust and going to them first, and helping them, having them help you guide through that would be really important. But you bring up a good point, and that we really would hope that all teachers would be able to respond to this. Some may receive training in it, some may not, but I think you always should voice it to any adult. And if you feel like you're not getting the response that you're being heard, just keep talking to people until you feel like you are being heard.
And is that a question for parents that maybe they should be asking their schools? Rob, are your teachers trained in diversity issues? Or I don't know what the right verbiage would be, but.
Well, we're not necessarily trained in diversity issues, but I mean, we talk about it. And one of the things I always say with my kids, and not necessarily about racism, is I generally get down on their level and I say, you can always come to me and talk to me about anything. So I try to make sure that I just leave the conversation open, so that if there's anything they want to come talk to me about, they can.
But I guess my question is that what parents should be asking about their school district?
I think it should. They should. Especially now, of course.
There's a few here in the Denver Metro and in Colorado, few teachers and administrators who are working on culturally responsive or racial equity training for their teachers. Even this summer, it became very popular over this summer. And so you can ask, just know that as a parent, you may have to say to your administrators or your teachers, well, I want that if you don't have it already, because it's while it's become popular, it's not as easy to ascertain or put it into a system that's already on its way rolling.
Okay, we hear from a 9-year-old in Denver who wants to know, why is my skin color and hair different?
I want to hear from Dr. Freeman on this one.
I had a feeling you were going to do that. I'm sorry, what was the child's name?
I don't have the child's name. Okay. A 9-year-old in Denver.
No worries. So I think usually, so I'm a scientist, I'm a doctor, but a lot of our training is in science. And how I think about it is there's something inside of us that makes up all of us called DNA. It's kind of like ingredients in a sense. And there are lots of different combinations of these ingredients that end up producing lots of different things. You can compare it to if you've tried to cook in a kitchen, you could try lots of different combinations. You'll get one thing one way and one thing another. Sometimes it, most of the time they're good if you just like to experiment. But in terms of how our DNA makes us up, inside we have all the same ingredients, but they're just put together in different ways. And it makes us have different colors. Makes us have different textures of hair. It has us be different sizes, and people have different levels of intelligence. It's all sorts of different things. But I think in the end, it makes us all beautiful, and helps make our world a really interesting place.
I love that explanation. It's like a great recipe, right? We all have our own little extra ingredients, maybe. Okay, great suggestion. Let's see. A young boy from Ellicott, I don't have an age or a name. Kids I know are asking why people don't get along anymore. And I think I think we all see it in our lives right now. There's a lot of people who are frustrated, whether it's, the protests or whether it's coronavirus, whatever it is, there's a lot of angst in our world right now. So this boy wants to know why people don't get along anymore, and how do we address that? Dr. Freeman?
So I think that's a really hard question. I think, I think about it. You're 3 years old. If we think about it, there's probably some things that you may love that are happening, and some things that you don't like. You may not like it when your parents tell you you need to go to bed, or you need to come inside from playing. And, you do those things because, your parents, or do what you say. But what if someone was telling you something or was treating you differently just because you're a boy? They're saying, you can't do this because you're a boy. You can't go outside and play because boys aren't allowed to play outside, or I'm going to be mean to you just because you're a boy, or the police are going to come get you just because you're a boy. And I think that,
And you're freezing up a bit here for us, Brandy. Oh, there we go. Now you're back. So
sorry, it is.
Last few words. Thank you.
Storming in Stapleton, so sorry, not Stapleton. I don't know where we were, but just the fact that, sorry, I don't know where do you know where it went out now?
And that's okay. I mean, just addressing the issue of why people don't get along anymore is really how we handle that, maybe that anxiety or angst in kids right now who are sensing something in the world, whether it be because they're stuck in their house, 24/7 these days. How we address that right now.
Yeah. So I think that in terms of just talking with kids, one, trying to get them to express their feelings and using different ways to do that, whether it's talking, whether it's drawing, whether it's acting things out, can be a good way to try to understand what a child is feeling. I think making sure that we're supporting them, trying to explain things at their level while it's explaining, why people are treated differently or why we shouldn't treat people differently, and that not some people in the world understand things differently, and we would encourage them to change.
And Lindsay, what do you do with Girl Scouts when there are issues of, well, coping skills, I guess would be the right words?
Yeah, and I think especially with this question, the key word here is anymore. That the little boy from Ellicott is asking, why aren't people getting along anymore? And it's important to say, all along in history, there's always been disagreements, and there's always been things that people have not. This is not a new thing, but maybe we're just talking about it more, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think addressing that is important as well. That just like Dr. Freeman was saying, that you may have things that make you angry and you don't agree with someone on But that doesn't mean you can't work through it. So you always, even when you're mad, you find a way to talk about it and to figure it out with the person that you're not agreeing with. And that's really important here too, that people have always had disagreements. This is not anything that's new. It's just we're trying to figure it out more, and that's a really, really important thing to do. And that's, it's a positive thing that we're trying to do this more.
Because the same little boy is saying also, why does skin matter now? Because it didn't matter before.
Yeah, and I think it's that maybe that it seems like that, but skin has always mattered, and it's a really important thing that, just like we've talked about, it's a wonderful, beautiful, unique thing that really does matter. And maybe it's just people are talking about it more, so you're thinking about it more and you're hearing about it more. But it really does matter, and it always has. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add to that.
No, I was actually going to just completely agree with you, is that it's always been there, but I also think just due to the amount of media we have and the tools that we have, it's more visible than it was.
And Robert, you wanted to add to that as well?
Just continuing to echo what Lindsay said, if I'm talking to a young man in Ellicott, I'm going to say, your skin makes you beautiful, makes you the person that you are. And so we want to celebrate that. Skin color has always mattered. And so because of that, we want to celebrate that. So what can we do to celebrate how we are all have beautiful skin that makes us who we are? That's how I would answer that question.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples maybe of how racism is embedded in our society that maybe we have blinders on right now, that that maybe children, you know, potholes that children can look out for?
What age group are we talking, Ann?
Ooh, I know that's a loaded question. I don't know. Let's maybe start with like middle school. I mean, how about that middle school age?
So I would say in middle school, especially now, as we're getting ready to go back to school, how many of your teachers have skin that's not white, or are wearing their hair in a certain way that looks different than the people in your neighborhood, perhaps, or speaking language that's other than yours? And just look around your whole school and see how diverse it is. And if you're missing some diversity, whether it's a lot of folks who identify as Black or identify as Indigenous or people of color, and you have no folks who identify as white in your school, there's something to be checking out there. A pothole, I think is what you said. And the same is true if all of your teachers are white or all of your administrators are white. That's one way. And then I think a second way is to look at the books and videos that you're watching in school, right? So do you get to see people who look like you or who don't look like you on the screen when your teacher is teaching, or in the books when you're reading, or in the library? And if not, what we're seeing is differences along skin color lines that we can start to talk about. That in itself is a pothole, even in middle school.
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, that's probably questions parents should be asking as well, right? When they choose the school a child is going to attend.
Well, I think therein you have some parents who aren't even able to choose where their kid might be able to go because of where they have to work or where they have to live. And that's a whole nother conversation, but I think parents might not even have the opportunity to ask that question because their choices are so limited.
So at a younger age, Rob, what would you say then might be some of the potholes that we should be looking out for as parents, as children?
Well, to touch on Robert, I mean, definitely more diversity in the schools. I mean, like my school, like I said, I'm the only male, I'm the only Black male. And I would like to see more male teachers. And we do have quite a few Latino women that work for us that are amazing. They teach Spanish in their classes. And it's just keeping it open and communicating and keeping those communications open between the parents and the teachers and the administration. And making the parents feel comfortable to ask those questions. And
as parents, I mean, is it as simple as encouraging our kids to play with different people? I mean, because they do see differences. Is it, do you push them to make friends with Not just the new child, but maybe the new child who looks a little different from them?
I don't know if I would say push them to do it, but I would say encouraging them that, you've got a classroom full of friends, everyone's friends, and you can all play together without making it seem like you're pointing out that one child.
Okay, that's a great suggestion.
And I would also just say that in addition to school, that school is one way, but also just different activities that as parents, it's trying to figure out if maybe that's not offered through school. Is it through something else? Is it something like Girl Scouts? Is it another activity where maybe if you know that your school may not provide that really seeking out those opportunities and whatever your child's interest is, trying to figure out how to make sure to diversify the people that they're exposed to in life is really critical, even if it can't happen through the school system.
Katie in Pueblo West asked, what educational materials can we use to teach diversity? And I know, Robert, you touched on this, but just talking about some of the materials in the classroom, are there places to go and find these educational materials that would make it easier for parents and even kids to find materials that teach diversity?
Oh, I definitely think so. So we have an 11-year-old son here at the house, and he's reading American Boy, and I forget the author right now, but we're having a conversation about what's going on in our world outside our doors, inside this book. And it is age appropriate, and we're reading it as a family. So there are any number of books that we can read. The Hate You Give is one we read as a family that connects to not only diversity, but race and racism, and also the police. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi is very popular right now, and his Stamped from the beginning is now there's like a junior reader for that particular book. So there are a lot of authors that are giving young people an opportunity to digest some of that material. So I definitely think going to the local library, or so many of the libraries are online now, so you can type in diversity and so many things are going to come up. You're really not going to go too wrong.
Great. Okay, so 8-year-old twins want to know, how can we help stop racism? What can we do to help?
Well, with that one, I would have to say educating yourself as much as possible. I mean, racism is a taught behavior. You're not born with it. So in order to stop it, we have to learn more about it and how it happens and why it happens. And yeah, like I said, to me, education is the best thing you can do, is just learn as much as you can. But like I said, it is a taught behavior, and we have to stop teaching it, basically.
Anyone else have advice for these 8-year-olds?
So I would offer that talking to different people, whether it's other kids in your class or at your school or through Girl Scouts or through another activity, it can be a great way to learn about different people. I think having friends from all types of backgrounds, trying to treat everyone with kindness and compassion, I think all of those can go a long way in terms of creating a culture where we are eventually going to get rid of racism.
I'd say ask your parents about your family tree. I don't know if it happens when you're 8 years old or 9 or 10, but ask them, about your family tree and what do the people that are in our ancestry look like, where they come from, how do they interact? Because then once you start learning a little bit more about your family history, you can notice that there are different people in your background who you would never know about. And so just like what Rob said, you can start to learn more about what is this thing called racism, and because it can be stopped, how do we do it?
And I would say what Dr. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
What Dr. Freeman said earlier about your spidey sense, just what you feel in certain situations is super important to pay attention to. And if you see something that you feel is not right, even if it's not something that maybe somebody points out and says that was racist or that was wrong, think about how it would make you feel if it happened to you, or if it is happening to you, if it feels wrong to be able to speak up. And you may feel really afraid about that. You may not know what to say. You may worry about getting in trouble or getting someone else in trouble, but that's one of the biggest things you can do, is to really speak up if you feel like something is wrong or someone is not being treated right or you're not being treated right. And to go back to those adults that you trust or to your friends, and to be able to say, this isn't right, and I want to do something about it. And that's one of the biggest ways that you can stop racism.
And the other point is, what do you say when you don't know what to say? You just know that something's not right and you can't find the words to describe a situation. What do you say to kids who find themselves in that awkward position?
Ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. If you say, I don't know what I'm feeling, but I'm feeling some things, I need help telling you about it, or something's happening and I'm not sure if it's okay, can you help me? It's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to not know what's going on with you on the inside, with you up here. Ask for help, because those who are around you, who care about you and want you to be safe, will help you figure those things out.
And as we wrap up this conversation, is there something else that, you all deal with children on a regular basis. So is there something else, some other tool that they should take away from this conversation? A piece of advice, maybe.
I guess kind of what Robert was saying is, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to talk. And, like I said, with my kids, I constantly tell them, you can come to me about anything. Mm-hmm. Just making sure that, they know that you'll be there, that you're not going to shun away from it.
And no question's a bad question, right?
Exactly.
And I'll build on that. I'll build on what Rob said and say, look at your circle of friends. Who do you hang out with? Who are you around the most? And don't be afraid to step outside of that circle to invite somebody else in. There are lots of people on the outside who don't have friends, or aren't being treated the way that you and your friends treat each other. Bring them in, because what they're going to bring to your circle is going to be awesome, because difference is cool.
That's great. All right, Lindsay, how about you?
Oh, I think all of the kids that ask these questions are on the right track. That, we know it's something that maybe it's hard to even know what questions to ask, but you guys thought about it and you put that out there, and that's super important. And I think if there's something that you're curious about and that you want to learn more about, to make sure to continue to ask these great questions. And you guys are being real leaders. You're leading the way for the community to say, let's think about these things. So just right on, you guys. You're doing awesome with these questions. And just for every other kid that may be watching, these are great examples of ways to ask these questions too.
Nice. And Dr. Freeman.
Yeah. So what I would say to the kids is, one, thank you for thinking. I think one thing that hearing your questions has told me is that the future is really bright. You all are really smart, and you're gonna make our world a better place by just doing what everyone's already said, asking questions, talking to people, having different friends, and really thinking about the world in a different way and thinking about how you can change it.
Great advice, everybody. Thank you so much for all your insight. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Being an ally is a verb, not a noun. It's the commitment to a lifelong journey of learning about and appreciating our differences. Our discussion today is just the start of the conversation. If you are ready to continue on this journey, then Girl Scouts of Colorado's Diverse, Inclusive, Together program is the perfect next step. We're all familiar with the badges and patches that Girl Scouts earn and display on their sashes or vests. Usually you have to be a Girl Scout to take part in this, but not in this case. Girl Scouts of Colorado has a free patch program with age-appropriate activities around issues of race and racism, and they're inviting everyone, not just Girl Scouts, to take part in this program. Denver 7 is proud to be a partner in helping get the word out so that as many of you as possible can take part in this free program. We encourage families to go through the program together. It will help expose you to the rich diversity of various cultures in your community and in the world. And it will deepen your understanding and respect for people who may be different from you. This new program can be completed by any youth in grades K through 12 and is a great activity to complete as a family. The free program can be accessed online at girlscoutsofcolorado.org and is available in both Spanish and English. I'm Anne Trujillo. Thank you for joining us for today's Conversation Starter, and we hope you take the next step in this journey with us.